Chapter 10. Unwanted Emotions. Zane shut the door to his small apartment, leaned back against the solid surface and took a deep breath. After all these years, he was still unable to master control of his human emotions. Had he revealed too much to the woman who looked at him with such strange fascination? What was she really after? Zane sighed with confusion, running his hands through his hair before he peeled the wet t-shirt off his skin. All it did was rain in this miserable city. He tossed his shirt on the floor and went in search of a drink, something hard that would banish those violet eyes from his racing mind. He grabbed the half-empty whiskey bottle on the counter and a clean glass. His bartending skills weren't nearly as advanced as his cooking. A flash of Sera's mouth, full of ice cream, her eyes gleaming up at him, caused him to grimace as a pang shot through his weak human heart. Zane made his way into his bedroom, flinging open the balcony doors and taking in the chaotic night. From over the wind and rain he could hear the sound of a lone siren washing over the city. A couple of drunks down below were huddled under a shambled roof, a small fire keeping them warm. Zane lived on the 13th floor. He liked it that way, high enough to breathe, low enough to escape. Despite the knowledge he already confirmed, he still chanced to glance down at his sculpted form. His skin was bare, no signs of his tattoos that the pest had pointed out in that dark alleyway. He missed them, what they represented. How each one symbolized a journey he'd committed, tone oath of the finder's sacred ways. Easier, much easier times. And though he'd rather eat well-done steak than admit it, he had to acknowledge that humans definitely had it worse. They were so weak, unaware of their limits, yet absolutely insistent on pushing themselves to great lengths and dangerous extremes. For what? Just to die and be forgotten? I vowed to leave the world a better place than I found it. He imitated Sera's voice, though he couldn't help but smile as he thought back to her passionate little rant. It had made him want to throw her down on the diner counter and show her exactly what made the world a better place. Get your mind out of the gutter and off of her, he demanded of himself. Zane sat down, kicking off his shoes and tossing his long legs up to rest on the top of the balcony. Yeah, good luck with that. He threw back the shot of dark liquor. The wind blew a spattering of rain across his chest and face. He relished the wild feeling, wishing it were the spray of the sea coating him. How he longed to lose himself in nature, to swim through violent storms and chaotic waves. The freedom, the fluidity of the water that he constantly craved. This reckless desire was bound to lead him down a dark path. His previous life. The last time he'd seen his family. Every moment leading up to the day that sorceress dragged him from the depths of the marsh he'd been exploring. She trapped him with her powers before destroying his peace of mind along with his entire life. In his natural form, Zane never once worried about feelings. They were an unnecessary complication to his existence. His power had always allowed him to easily suppress the unwanted, and throw his emotions deep down inside to be locked away in his dormant soul. Until the day that sorceress unlocked the door and threw away the key. Even without his power, Zane had been positive that after being human for an extended amount of time, he would once again regain control over these plaguing symptoms. But unfortunately over the years both his anger and empathy grew. Anger. His inability to stop or effectively hide his feelings. Empathy. The inevitable connection that he now possessed to humans. As much as he tried to hate them, he couldn't do it. Not really. And so isolation became his drug of choice. Keely was one of the few exceptions. She was a kid, not yet turned into the lying, scheming souls that most human adults truly were. It was easy being good to her. But now the essence of empathy was threatening to engulf him, drown him in these wildly charged emotions he was currently experiencing. The irony of drowning was not lost on him. He chuckled darkly as he poured himself another drink. Sera Hastings. 1 minute he'd been practically begging her to leave him the hell alone, and the next, he was demanding they meet again. His moods were probably giving her whiplash. At least he wasn't some unfeeling stone like that creep Lonnie. What the hell was with that guy? Zane felt bad vibes from him the second he slammed open that door. He was nothing but a privileged snake. Surely Sera would have greeted him with more enthusiasm if she actually wanted to marry the oaf. Zane also got the sense that they hadn't seen each other in quite some time. A reunion perhaps? Did she tell him where she was? Maybe it was all an act for her to play the innocent damsel. His gut told him that wasn't the case, and his human stomach was the only thing he trusted these days. He was more curious than he wanted to be. When would she return? He was sure now there was almost nothing he could do that would scare her away. She was invested in this mystery. In his mystery. She wanted to help him. Why? Was he just an experiment to her? Or did she truly believe all those righteous words she threw his way back at the diner? His thoughts once again landed on his past. The concept of coming back, returning. It was something finders never did. Once they'd lived in a place, no matter how long or how much they thrived there, once they left, they never returned, never went back. Zane had been used to this way of life for so long, that even now, he was still surprised by the monotony and routines that humans so desperately craved. Except for Sera. She would have made a great finder. Zane startled himself with that traitorous thought. Where had it come from? Her a finder? Why, so she could drive him insane for an eternity instead of just one night. Zane ran his hand over his face with immense agitation. What was it going to take to get this woman out of his system? He took another shot. There was no use speculating on what the future would hold. It was out of his control, as so many things were these days. If she was as flaky and pathetic as most wealthy humans in this city, she would avoid returning, leave him in peace and marry that flatfoot idiot. He growled unexpectedly as Lonnie's sneering face popped into his mind. Zane knew Sera experienced the same physical draw to him that he did to her. He'd seen it written across her blushing face multiple times in just a couple of hours. What would it progress to if they decided to go forward with this curse-breaking operation? He drank again. Finally, the feeling of alcohol was setting in. The warm tingling in his brain had nothing to do with her, and everything to do with the liquor. He was sure. As much as he despised it, he pictured, for the 10th time, Lonnie's arm wrapping possessively around her waist. Zane was thankful Sera didn't know how close he actually came to snapping the man's arm in 2, maybe 3 places. Sera's fiancé. His voice was rich with agitation. How amusing that she felt the need to keep that little detail to herself. Though Zane's expression was far from amusement as he clenched his fist around his glass. In the back of his brain he heard a small voice say, "She was trying to tell you about herself, but you kept interrupting." "I don't care," Zane insisted out loud, as if that would somehow make his raging emotions less than true. He was really pissing himself off. Chapter 11 Diner Drama. Although the rain had subsided somewhere between darkness and dawn, the sky was still a bright gray the next morning as Zane trudged up to the diner with a slight hangover. His mood was as miserable as the dark clouds hanging over his head. He had barely reached the door when a cheery voice sounded behind him, calling his name. He realized in that moment that he'd sensed her before she even spoke. He turned around slowly to see the woman who'd consumed his every thought last night, bounding towards him with excitement. He could tell, even from this distance, that she had dark circles hugging the bottom of her lids. He felt his heart skip a beat as a slow smirk slid unwillingly onto his lips. Good. He hoped he'd caused her just as sleepless a night as she'd given him. "Good morning," she chirped merrily as she came to a stop in front of him. Though she was clearly exhausted, her energy burned bright like a sun, warming him from the inside out. Zane scowled at her for good measure. "Ugh, don't tell me you are one of those obnoxious morning people," he complained, looking down at her with irritation. She smiled even wider. "It's the most productive time of the day. Why are you here?" His tone was harsher than he intended. Zane felt the slight prick of guilt as the smile half fell from her face. He bit his tongue with the urge to bring it back. "I did some research last night. I was hoping we could discuss it," she started with slight hesitation at the look he was giving her. "Some people have to work in this city, you know. I don't have time right now." He dismissed her as he turned to unlock the front door of the diner. "Besides, Keely's off today, so it's just me." He was expecting her to stomp her privileged little feet and whine, but once again, this woman was determined to surprise him. "I'll help you then." He whipped back around to stare at her determined face. "What?" But she was no longer focused on him. Instead, her beautiful features were titled upwards with a frown as she examined the front of the building. "I think we need a new sign. It's crooked and some of those lights are out. Do you have a ladder? Tools? I should go pick up some paint for those chip spots on the trim. I can fix it up in no time." Zane was sure she was messing with him, but as he continued to stare at her, like a beacon in the gloomy dawn, he realized she was absolutely serious about getting onto the roof. Sera once again turned her gaze to Zane's shocked features. "Would that be all right?" He let out a sound of disbelief as he opened the door and went inside. She trailed after him. Apparently she was here to stay. "I've never worked as a waitress, but I'm sure it won't be a problem. People usually feel comfortable around me." She stressed usually, as if she were specifically referring to him. "Where do you keep those little order pad thingies?" Zane ignored her as he made his way into the kitchen, shrugging off his leather jacket and exchanging it for an apron. Unlike the pest behind him, he was the opposite of a morning person and was not willing to engage in conversation until he had at least 3 cups of coffee. I'm not too well versed in cooking, but my breakfasts are absolutely divine. Ask anyone who knows me. Zane gritted his teeth as the unwanted image of her serving her fiancé breakfast in bed popped into his mind. An emotion that felt entirely too close to jealousy ignited in his brain. Put the coffee on, he growled as he set to work on prepping for the day. Sera nodded once and saluted him before she practically bounced back out into the dining area. Within minutes Zane could smell the fresh aromatic beans, and it drew him out to her once more. She was already halfway done with an inventory list by the time he took his first sip. I'm not paying you, he snapped as she looked up at him in surprise. But you can keep any tips you make, he added, his attempt at softening the blow. Her eyes warmed in that moment and it made Zane's stomach do a backflip. That's very generous of you, but any tips I get I would like to put towards fixing this place up. Your food looks so good and my belief is that an establishment should also reflect the quality of the product. Is that so? He mused as she nodded back at him diligently. Tell me. He closed the gap between them ever so slightly. He watched as a light blush rose on her face. Don't you have anything better to do with your time? This is what I do with my time, she insisted, her eyes flickering down to his lips and then back up to his eyes. Zane took another step closer and watched as she bumped into the counter behind her. Very slowly he reached his toned arm out behind her. Their faces were so close she could feel his warm breath falling against her cheek. She closed her eyes in anticipation of whatever was to come. Zane smirked as he retreated, a packet of sugar now in his hand. He shook it a couple of times. The sound jarred Sera from her daze. She opened her eyes with mortification. What had she been thinking? I like it sweet. His voice was a caress, but his eyes she could see were mocking her. She bit down on her lip and pushed off of the counter, going around to the other side to start some light cleaning as he watched her embarrassment with growing amusement. Before people start coming in, care to elaborate on your research? He asked, grinning like a fool. It was rare Zane grinned before noon. He blamed the pest. He couldn't help the grim delight that flowed through him. Sera was affected by him. He liked that. A lot. Well, she began, looking incredibly relieved to banish her little misstep. I found all sorts of confinement curses, some that are very similar to yours. On reversing them I was even luckier. There are quite a few options, though I do need more information on what exactly happened to you, before I can decide which one will have the highest probability of working. Fascinating, he drawled, a little more than impressed at her commitment. Tell me about them. Well, there's human sacrifice, which is absolutely out of the question. She glared at the devious look in his eyes. I'm sure you have some nasty joke on the tip of your tongue, but forget it, she snapped. He laughed out loud, genuinely. Surprised the both of them. Sera's frown lessened as she continued on, unable to now meet his ridiculously beautiful eyes. She liked it very much when he smiled. I personally like the idea of using elemental powers, but it's an extremely time-consuming process and very complex. We'd have a lot of work cut out for us. Zane nodded along, not opposed to the idea of keeping her by his side for as long as possible. Anything else? She hesitated, the color once again returning to her features, as she toyed with the cleaning rag in her hands. Like I said, I need more information on your end before I can come to any solid conclusions. Zane smiled wickedly. He'd bet anything she came across some highly erotic magic, judging by the look on her face. Sex magic has always been my personal favorite, he offered with a wink. Sera's jaw dropped open. How did you? It's written all over your face. Having naughty thoughts about me, Miss Hastings. She fanned herself with the dish rag, her mouth open in shock. Of course not. Before she could finish, Zane's face darkened with bitterness. You're engaged. Yes, I know. She stared at him, a slight frown creasing her brow. She tried to speak, but he waved her away and turned back towards the kitchen before she could see how much that word bothered him. We'll finish this later, he said, as he spotted the first customer of the day. Don't bother me unless it's urgent, he finished before striding off into the kitchen. Sera watched as the door swung shut behind him. Why was he bringing up Lonnie? Was he still mad about last night? She'd question him later. Right now there was work to be done. She turned and greeted the customer with a glowing smile. As much as Zane attempted to ignore her for the rest of the day, that task was deemed impossible. He listened to her honeyed voice as she charmed his customers. He memorized the sound of her lithe feet striding back and forth across the polished floors. Long after the dinner rush was over, he became aware that her presence left the building. Frowning with a deep scowl, he threw down his knife and went in search of her. He found her on the roof. Are you serious? He bellowed from the sidewalk, staring up at her in astonishment. How did you get up there? Come down before you break your neck. She glanced over the side of the roof at him with a serene smile. Almost done. This is going to look fantastic, she cried with joy. Zane crossed his arms, fighting the smile that was threatening to consume him. This woman was doing her very best to disarm him. Why did you wait until it was dark out to do this? It was so busy today, I had to make sure there were no customers left before I started. You're clumsy as hell, pest. Get down now. Hold on. Her eyes were glued to her task. He waited impatiently as she disappeared behind the sign. He was acutely aware of her body sliding over the unstable shingles. Zane felt his heart pick up pace. He was worrying about her against his will. Sera, he called with agitation, attempting to conceal the concern in his tone. Wait for it, she answered back. And before he could reply, the fish and chips sign lit up with a spectacular glow. Against the inky blackness of the night, it blazed with welcoming warmth. The same warmth Zane was beginning to feel as the ice encasing his heart started to melt. He stared at it with wonder. She'd changed the lights and fixed up the trim with a fresh coat of paint. It made all the difference in the world. It looked as good as new. Before Zane could further contemplate the things this woman would do to amaze him, her smiling face appeared again as she edged across the roof. She looked down at him with childlike excitement. Isn't it wonderful? Yes. Fantastic, now come down, he barked, watching her every move as she stepped onto the first rung of the ladder he'd not noticed. So bossy, Sera murmured under her breath. She was proud of her work, but had to admit she was even more thrilled with Zane's look of surprise. She was starting to feel that shocking him would become a new favorite pastime. Sera once again contemplated the feelings he inspired in her. They were purely physical, weren't they? It was a natural chemical reaction, she insisted. She was so lost in thoughts of her own, she didn't realize she'd missed the step until she was already falling through the air. She shut her eyes tight, waiting for the hard impact of the concrete ground. But it never came. When she dared open them, she saw that strong arms were closed tight about her. Her hands were pressed against a very hard chest and Zane was staring at her with disbelief and something else, something very human. Chapter 12. A meeting of marriage. Before he could do something incredibly stupid for the entire street to see, Zane gracefully deposited Sera onto her feet. But damn! She was looking at him with absolute wonder. It made him want to crush his lips to hers as close as humanly possible. His jaw ticked as she snapped from her stupor. Immediately flustered, she stepped back from him. Are you trying to get yourself killed? His voice was low and strained. I'm sorry, she bowed her head slightly, nervously pushing her hair behind her ears. Do you like it? She added in a small voice. Zane glanced up at the sign to avoid showing her the depths of his feelings. He liked it. He liked it too much. It's fine, he countered. He glanced at her sullen features. Better than fine, he continued, furious at how much he wanted to see her face fill with joy. Thanks. Her eyes lit up and Zane's heart was once again pounding against his chest. You're welcome. They stood side by side staring up, both very aware of the rapid emotions tangling in the night air. Sera opened her mouth, but before he could even contemplate what she might say, a phone rang from her pocket. Hi Mom, she answered. What's going on? Zane chanced a glance at her beautiful features. Her face went from contentment to worry in a split second. That's tonight? I completely forgot, I'm sorry. She was already turning and heading back into the diner. Zane followed her, listening raptly. I'm on my way. Sera grabbed her things from behind the counter as Zane subconsciously placed himself in front of the door. With a client. I'll see you soon. She hung up the call and turned to look at Zane with frenzied desperation. I'm sorry, I forgot I had plans tonight. Can we meet tomorrow? She asked with a hopeful glance. Zane was overly curious about what plans had her so frantic. I can't tomorrow. I work. Tomorrow night? Fine. But not here. He stalked towards the counter and scribbled down an address on the order pad. He grabbed her wrist and slapped the paper into her waiting hand. Meet me after 9. She nodded, a grateful smile on her lips. But Zane still caught the worry behind her eyes. Is everything all right? He hated himself in that moment. It was none of his business. She looked up at him in surprise, hesitant to answer. Yes. I'll see you tomorrow night. Then she was gone. Zane sighed to himself as he went back to cleaning up. He already knew without her irritating presence, he'd be miserable for the rest of the evening. The cab dropped Sera off at the front of the mansion. She raced up the stairs, half out of breath. There would be no time to change her clothes or fix her hair. She was already 45 minutes late. She skidded to a stop in front of the closed dining room doors and took a moment to compose herself. 2 maids watched her from the end of the corridor, giggling like schoolgirls. Sera rolled her eyes and pulled open the doors. Whatever conversation had been flowing came to an immediate halt as all heads snapped in her direction. Sera apologized profusely as she found her place on the left side of the table and sat down. She looked up. She was staring once again into Lonnie's eyes. My daughter's work is very important to her, so much so that when she becomes involved in a project, she often loses track of time. Hestia explained patiently to the dark-haired gentleman seated on her right. Understandable, I cannot fault the young woman for taking her duties so seriously. I only hope she puts as much effort into her personal life as she does her professional. Lonnie's father nodded sternly in Sera's direction. I apologize, Sera repeated. It's good to see you, sir, she added to Tomas Baron. I hope you've been well. I'll be even better once we finalize the upcoming nuptials. Sera felt herself inwardly cringe. Upcoming. That meant soon. Let us continue, Tomas went on. As I was saying, we've wasted enough time over the last 5 years. I'd like to settle on a date before this evening is over. That seems like a suitable goal, don't you agree, dear? Her mother encouraged with a hopeful smile.
Sera nodded.
She watched as Lonnie's shoulders relaxed with relief. How was your day? He asked softly, looking her over with reverence. If he noticed her messy hair or dirty hands, he didn't comment. Sera was grateful for the small mercy. Busy, she offered, picking up the glass of wine that had been poured for her and taking a large sip. But productive. Now, Lonnie's father's voice boomed down the table, pulling their attention from one another. How much time do you two need to prepare? I propose to finalize the contract by next week and hold the wedding at the end of the month. Lonnie was already nodding his consent, his eyes blazing with desire as he considered what Sera's acceptance would mean. She would finally be his. Even if she didn't love him now, he'd do everything in his power to change her mind. Wait, Sera's command stopped everyone in their tracks. That seems awfully soon. I want everything to be perfect. Would it be possible to move the timeline just a bit? I have much to prepare. Tomas' eyes darkened with displeasure, but it was Lonnie who spoke. You can have as much time as you need, he offered, reaching his hand across the table and grasping her fingers in his. There's no pressure. Sera gave him a slight smile that he deemed more of a grimace. He hated that her instinct was to pull away from him. What exactly do you need time for, Miss Hastings? This marriage has been set in stone before the two of you were even born. Tomas' voice was soft, but his tone was like a hammer swinging down to crush her hope. Sera must have her reasons, her mother chimed in. I doubt it will need to be pushed too far back, right, darling? Sera nodded gratefully to her mother as Tomas let out an impatient huff. Since before they were born. Sera allowed her thoughts to turn to the archaic practice of arranged marriages as Tomas and Hestia continued to discuss possible venues and contract clauses. Originally, such measures had been set in place around the time that magical creatures and monsters still thrived on the island. This practice was created in order to avoid any interspecies breeding, seeing as humanity's worst fear was their children marrying and mixing with magical blood. There was no telling what the result would be, and therefore all marriages, especially within the upper class, were solidified in stone. Though magic was long gone from the city, this practice had held and evolved. Now those without money or prospects were considered the monsters that humanity needed protecting from. Sera's mood turned dark as she contemplated the sacrifice she was going to make in the name of a concept she never believed in. Why had her mother asked her to do this? Sera, Lonnie's voice pulled her from her thoughts. Can we go for a walk? Yes. She was beginning to feel like she was suffocating as she listened to Lonnie's father go on and on. Sera realized she'd spaced out for long enough that their conversation had turned to business. She got to her feet. Lonnie followed. We've tripled production in the last month, Tomas was telling Hestia. I should have the newest model to you by next week. I'm very much looking forward to it. Hestia's eyes fell to her daughter's strained face and she added, You two go ahead, I'm sure you have a lot of catching up to do. Tomas nodded his agreement, a look of triumph crusting his eyes as he watched Lonnie's hand fall to the small of Sera's back. He guided her from the room. Not long now, Hestia observed as the young couple disappeared from their view. Can't come soon enough, was Tomas' reply. His reputation is in tatters, she's the only who can mend it. After all, that's what she's best at, no? Fixing broken things. Lonnie removed his hand from her back the second they were out the door. Sera ignored him and turned down the dark hallway towards the back entrance. He pursued her. They didn't speak again until they were lost amongst the thick vegetation of the sprawling garden. "I'm sorry about my father," Lonnie finally broke the silence. "It's not your fault," Sera intoned, her mind distracted, conflicted. It had been so easy to imagine for the last 5 years that this day would never come. But here they were. Sera felt the sharp pain of defeat ache in her bones. "Did you mean what you said in there?" he asked quietly as he followed a step behind her, the ever-diligent bodyguard. "You want everything to be perfect?" Sera let out a sardonic little laugh. "If everything was perfect we wouldn't be forced into marriage in the first place." "It's not forced, not to me." Sera sighed, brushing her hands along the tops of the perfectly trimmed hedges. If only she could lose herself in here and never return. "You had feelings for me," he pushed on stubbornly. "Who's to say those feelings won't return now that we are back together?" She stopped and turned to look at him with astonishment. "That was before you lied to me. Sera. That was before you broke my heart." "I know Things are different now. I'm different. And you? I don't know who you are anymore. I'm not sure if I ever really did." He took her hands in his, stepping closer, his dark eyes begging her to see the real him. "Don't say that. You have no idea the regret my actions have brought onto me." "No clue. Yet you cannot tell me anything. How convenient." Lonnie let out a sigh of deep frustration, his hands clenching hers tightly in his grasp. "Please, Sera, I'll never ask you for anything ever again. All I want, no need, is this one chance to prove to you I'm not who you think I am. And it doesn't matter what I want, does it? I'm trapped. Chained to you. Destined to be your wife no matter what kind of person you are. Why does my opinion mean so much to you?" Lonnie took a shuddering breath as his hands moved to her face. He tilted her chin up to look directly into her eyes. "I love you, Sera Hastings. I always have and always will. And there's simply nothing in this life or the next that you could do to possibly change that." Sera tore her face from his grasp and took a step back. She didn't want to hear more false promises and declarations. "All I want is the truth. Until you can give me that, I'm not interested in hearing anything else you've got to say," she spat. Lonnie's jaw tightened with frustration as he felt his ever-looming temper rise. "It must have been easy to get over me, huh? Must have taken you no time. Especially with every degenerate in this city chasing after you." She looked at him as if he'd slapped her. Her eyes turned dark with fury. "You have no clue what your betrayal did to me. None. How dare you presume to know how I felt?" It was quiet for several moments before he spoke again. "Then tell me, please, Sera, I want to make this right." "I can't. You know that already. So please give me space. Time. The more you push me, the further away I feel." She turned on her heel and took off, leaving him amongst thorns of his own. Chapter 13 Seductive Spells. Though Sera spent the following day immersed in her social work, the bitter taste of last night's dinner still held in her mouth. She threw herself into her busy schedule, hoping to dispel the gloom that was encasing her heart. But by the time she found herself outside the tall, ominous-looking apartment complex later that evening, her mood had only blackened further. Sera felt a reckless impulse seize her, as the thought of leaving Lonnie standing at an empty altar flashed in her mind. She wasn't that cruel. But as the metaphorical four walls closed in tighter around her, it was natural that she look for a way to escape. If she were a finder, she could just stay underwater until he gave up. Sera realized that she'd been harboring the severe delusion that Lonnie would have gotten over her by now, that he would have left his feelings for her in that courtroom and over the course of 5 years, would have turned into a different man. As much as she hated to admit it, he still felt the same to her. What did that mean? Did he really have an explanation for his crimes, or had he always been that good of an actor? Sera sighed with frustration as she attempted to clear her mind. Throwing back her shoulders, she marched into the seemingly deserted building. The 13th floor. How fitting, she mused, once again referencing the scrap of paper Zane handed her before she'd left the diner. She ran her fingers over his script. It was elegant though messy, just like him. She smiled a bit. As much as she didn't want to admit it, she was looking forward to their meeting more than she should have been. She stepped out of the elevator before hitching the bag of heavy books higher onto her shoulder. She rang the doorbell. Zane's heart leapt at the sound of Sera's arrival. He'd been driving himself crazy all day, back and forth, wondering if she would show. If he even wanted her to. Deep down he knew the answer to that despicable question. He tossed his messy hair around, straightened his tight black tee and swung open the door with a nonchalant shrug. Sera took his form in. How could he be so casual yet devastatingly desirable? She bit her lip from voicing her thoughts. "Hi," he intoned with a bored drawl. as if he'd not been pacing his apartment for the last hour in anticipation of seeing her. "Hi," she repeated, ducking under his arm and entering the small flat. "Come in." He mocked to the empty space in front of him. She laughed lightly as he shut the door and locked it. Sera analyzed the space. She immediately liked it. She was surprised he had so many plants, plus a spectacular view of the city. It was cozy and felt removed from outside energy. The lighting was low and the walls were covered with bookcases. She smiled in delight. "You didn't tell me you were such a bookworm," she quipped, turning to grin at him. Zane couldn't help the smile that worked itself up onto his lips. "You never asked." She set her bag down on the low coffee table with a thud. "Can I get you anything? A drink?" He felt weird being so formal, so polite. He hardly ever let any humans into his space. She shook her head and plopped down on the couch with all the comfortability in the world. "Make yourself at home," he muttered as she patted the spot next to her. "I like it here." "It's very you," she concluded. Zane raised an eyebrow. "How do you know what's me?" "Your energy. It's become familiar to me." "Is that so?" He joined her on the couch, watching with pleasure as her eyes roamed over his lean, muscular form. He'd purposely chosen the tightest shirt he owned. Her pampered little prince of a fiancé wore expensive suits, but it was underneath that really counted. So what if he wanted to show off his physique a little? So what if he tempted her just a bit? Sera swallowed hard, her chest constricting as she looked him over. He was so much too much. She stopped herself from reaching out to feel the tight muscles he displayed so perfectly. They stared at one another. Sera felt as if all the air was sucked from the room. She could barely breathe. Why did his presence have such an effect on her? "Well," he whispered darkly. Sera shook her head and lunged for her bag, quickly unpacking the books and diving straight into business. She missed Zane's look of satisfaction as he ran his fingers back and forth over his lips to hide his grin. "Let's start with you telling me more details about the curse," she began, lifting a notepad onto her lap and clicking her pen several times. Oh man, was she a ball of nerves or what? Zane fell back onto the cushions of the couch, his arm lazily reaching up to rest behind her. Sera was highly aware of their proximity. She sat straight as a board, attempting to push down her chaotic thoughts. "How long ago were you cursed?" she asked, her pen paused over the blank paper. 40 years ago. Her eyes snapped to him with disbelief. "You can't be much older than I am." He laughed at her with true mirth. Finders stop aging when they reach adulthood, which is around 30 in human years. My human body doesn't seem to react to time either. Fascinating. That is definitely good to know, narrows down our options, she muttered to herself. And what do you recall about the magic she used on you? What exactly happened? Any and all amusement slid from Zane's face as an icy wrath tore across his features. Sera felt herself shiver as she turned to look at him with inquisitive interest. I was exploring the marshlands, a short distance from where I was living at the time. 1 minute I was in the water, searching for a lost artifact. The next, an invisible force, some kind of unseen net, was dragging me to the surface. There was no warning. I landed on the ground and there she was. Light and power were radiating from her. She threw all sorts of spells at me. I collapsed. When I came to my senses, I was human and she was gone. Did it hurt? It was the most excruciating pain I've ever felt in my life. And she just left you like that? Zane pondered the question as he thought back to that fateful day. I think something went wrong. She was all but ready to finish me, take whatever it was she wanted, obviously my powers. But then she screamed in pain and disappeared. Sera jotted this down quickly, her focus complete. What changed after that? Fangs gone. Claws gone. Ability to breathe underwater gone. Tattoos gone. Strength gone. Senses dulled. My blood was red. Human. I was talking about your mind. Zane should have known that was what she was after. I could feel human emotions. He said this with deep regret. Emotions I'd never experienced firsthand. It was overwhelming to say the least. It did more damage than losing the physical aspects of myself. So as a finder you didn't feel? I did, it was just different. I could control emotions. I buried them. They were useless to me. How? What do you mean how? How are feelings useless? They cause stress and pain. Humans are miserable because they have too many of them. Feelings also bring great joy and fulfillment to one's life. Zane snorted. Of course you'd say that. What do you mean I would say that? You have nothing to stress or worry about in life if you did. You wouldn't be here trying to help me. That couldn't be further from the truth. Oh really? He leaned forward, forcing her gaze in his direction. Her eyes were alight with indignation. That pleased him very much. Maybe she didn't think he noticed, but he could tell from the second he opened the door that her mood was darker than usual. Yes, what he told her was true. His senses had dulled when the sorceress stole from him. But for some reason that aspect of change did not hold true when it came to Sera. He could sense her emotions quite easily. He took this as a hopeful sign. Yes, really, she snapped. But I'm not here to unload my very human burdens on you. She turned back to her notes. I won't waste your time. Who said it was a waste of my time? Do tell.
I'm infinitely curious.
I'd rather not. Then let me deduce. He held up 3 fingers in front of her face. 1. You don't have any financial troubles, so that can't be what's stressing you. 2. You're healthy and you have some kind of family, do you not? So there should be too much pain there. And 3. The thing most humans spend their lives obsessing over, love. So it must be that. Is it your finest that's troubling you? Her eyes darkened at his last comment and Zane knew he'd hit the nail on the head. She stared at him with surprise before her face tightened with suspicion. Why does the thought of my fiancé seem to interest you so much? Zane scoffed. It doesn't interest me, not nearly as much as it seems to bother you. It's complicated. Oh. Yes. How perfectly human, he drawled with annoyance. Zane knew he should stop himself but he couldn't. So what's his deal? I'm guessing he's some rich idiot with the brain cells of a slug. She gasped with outrage. He threw her a sarcastic smile. You love to think so little of me. Lonnie is quite intelligent. She shot back, annoyed with his amusement at her discomfort. Not that it's any of your business. Well, that night in the diner, you seemed like strangers to me. We didn't used to be. Zane's ears perked with interest. That was vulnerability, hurt that he felt in her tone. Felt? Oh hell. It's a long aggravating story that I've been trying to forget for the most of the day. So if you could just stop, I'd be really grateful. Besides, we have more important things to discuss than my personal life. Zane thoroughly disagreed, but he let it go. A small frown slipped onto his face. He did not like it that she was sad, distraught and feeling lost. He hated even more that his empathy was as strong as a nuclear blast when she was in his sight. I'm sorry, he bit out, for prying. Her eyes met his once more and she forced a small smile onto her lips. It's fine. You're just naturally curious. Like me. His eyes widened in response. Like you, he muttered, a blush highlighting his sharp cheekbones. As if. In that moment, she realized his look of surprise was the most satisfying thing she'd seen all week. Maybe she did need to get a life. Sera bit her lip to keep from smiling as she turned back to her notes. She felt her body sink deeper into the couch as he readjusted himself. Zane was now just close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. Sera instinctively felt herself lean into his heat. Chapter 14. A stranger's speculation. Something was off. He'd spent the entire day looking for her, and had come up empty-handed. The shelter told him she wasn't due back until next week. The clinic informed him they hadn't seen her in a few days. The maid who opened the mansion doors told him that Sera left early this morning and had yet to return. By the time Lonnie got back to his penthouse on the south side of the city, he was desperately anxious for answers. Is this how it was going to be? Every time he tried to get close, she was going to disappear on him? He shrugged off his suit jacket, not bothering with the lights as he sauntered towards the floor-to-ceiling glass windows and looked out at the night. For someone who'd recently acquired his freedom, Lonnie was feeling more trapped than ever. This place felt cold. Another prison just like the one he'd come from. He was alone. He was without her. How could he convince her to give him a chance? What would it take? He knew Sera wasn't like normal women. There was nothing he could buy her. No sweet words he could say that would sway her determination. She didn't need him. The thought really irked him. He took a deep breath and tried rolling his muscular shoulders, attempting to ease the stress that was constantly consuming him. How long would his father wait before he began applying the pressure that Lonnie knew he was most capable of? No one understood what he'd been through, or why he was unable to spill the truth. It wasn't so straightforward. There were complications, consequences that would come with his confession. How much more could he take? How many hours could he spend watching Sera look at him with those angry, accusing eyes before he broke down and told her everything? He'd have to be stronger. You are weak. Pathetic. Is what his father would chant over and over again as he beat Lonnie for the smallest misstep. He still felt like that scared, lost boy sometimes, especially tonight. Back then he had Sera to patch him up, to assure him he was worth something. Lonnie stared at his hardened face in the glass. He carefully reached up and ran his callous finger down his scar. He'd endure 1,000,000 more years of pain, of prison, if only Sera would give him her heart. Without warning, a voice spoke to him out of the darkness. "Lonnie, why do you keep lying to yourself?" it questioned with amusement. At first, he thought the words had come from his own head. But no, the voice was too loud not to be real, and besides, he recognized it at once. He reached for the light switch. Click. Nothing happened. "What do you want?" he bit out, turning his gaze once again back to the sky. "I'm not in the mood for your riddles." The voice chuckled. "You know I only want to help you. And yourself, I'm sure," he muttered under his breath. Lonnie's eyes shifted as he watched dark smoke span and grow, slithering like snakes across the ceiling. His visitor loved to play in the shadows. "You spent your whole day looking for her. But you know where she really is, don't you? It must have crossed your mind." Lonnie felt a chill run down his spine as he began to pace slowly, methodically, back and forth in darkness. He was a sucker for danger. It was a way to channel his rage with external force, to expel the chaotic feelings from his soul onto another. The next words the shadow spoke pierced his heart. "Did you purposely avoid going back to the diner? What if she's there? With him?" Him. Lonnie ground his teeth together as spite poured through his system. As much as he tried to banish the memory from his mind, he couldn't stop picturing Sera smiling at that scumbag. What did he want with her? The voice continued on, taunting him. "After everything you sacrificed for her, this is how she repays you? While you spent years in prison, she was off giving herself to another. Aren't you going to do something about it? Why are you saying this?" Lonnie spat, the words ringing maliciously in his head. "I didn't think you were this weak." Lonnie's eye twitched as the word burrowed, festered, in the already oozing wounds that permeated his mind. He could almost feel the smile from the shadows. It sounded again. "I assumed you would fight for her. Perhaps you need my help more than I originally anticipated." "I don't need any more of your cursed help," Lonnie snarled. "Here," the voice crooned. "Take this." The sound of something heavy landing on the living room table reached his ears. He moved forward with vengeful purpose. Lonnie looked down. On the table sat a sword set in an ancient scabbard covered with strange rune markings. Lonnie inspected it with a keen eye. "What's this? Power?" He looked towards the dark mass of thick smoke that floated across from him. He attempted to peer into the chaos, in search of the face he knew lay hidden there. "Use it to take back what is yours." Despite himself, Lonnie reached for the sword. It felt perfectly balanced in his hands. He gripped the pommel tight, his fist clenching as he imagined it was his competition's throat his fingers were wrapped around. He pulled the sword with a violent jerk from its resting place. The metallic weapon gleamed in the dim moonlight, its blade razor-sharp and vicious-looking. It suited his mood perfectly. "How?" Lonnie asked into the darkness. A laugh filled with antagonism rebounded throughout the room. "The woman you love is with another man, possibly alone this late at night." The voice tooted with mocking disapproval. "What do you think they're doing?" Lonnie couldn't stop the fury that exploded inside of his chest. His heart was racing. He felt sick to his stomach. He needed to find her. Now. Go. "Why are you wasting precious time? They might already be." The stranger trailed off, letting their wicked words pound into Lonnie's veins. "They might be what?" he hissed with anxiety. There was no answer. Suddenly the power flickered on. Lonnie scanned every corner of the room. He was alone. He should have taken the time to process their encounter, possibly think before he'd act. But that was one of the precious few things that all of his money could never buy: time. He was running out of it. His brain was inundated with images of Sera. Sera with him. Sera in his bed. Sera moaning his name. Lonnie's mind ran wild as each scenario flew past in sickening images. The possibilities that the voice spoke of hit very close to home. It was too much. He couldn't handle the burning jealousy that was threatening to undo him. He had to act or he was going to lose his mind. Lonnie stalked towards the door, sheathing the sword at his side. His eyes set with determination. He wouldn't let anyone take Sera from him. They'd have to pry her from his cold, dead hands. Chapter 15. Into the dark. How long had she been here? Sera chanced a glance at the clock. It was almost midnight. She rubbed her eyes and looked toward Zane. He'd been quiet for the last hour or so. His focus remained fixed on the large book sprawled out in front of him. She carefully watched him without alerting him that her attention was waning. She let out a yawn and stretched her limbs, feeling the ache there. When was the last time she'd gotten a proper night's sleep? Sera rose slowly to her feet. Zane immediately glanced up at her. his eyes clear and alert. He really was a night owl. Do you need anything? He asked. Sera shook her head. Just taking a little break. His eyes followed her as she moved around his apartment, landing at the large windows that looked out over the city skyline. Zane had to admit, he enjoyed the sight of her looking so relaxed in his home. She sighed as she ran a finger down the window pane. Her gaze landed on a looming building in the not-so-far distance. Zane moved like a panther. She didn't even realize he was behind her until he spoke. Hastings Apartments, he muttered, his breath fogging the window. Guessing you own those too? Sera nodded. They are my mother's. Do you do social work there? Zane's tone was cautious.
No.
She thinks it's too dangerous, even for me to visit. Dangerous? I don't know about that. More like creepy and seemingly abandoned, he informed her. Sera turned around to look at him. She hadn't realized how close they were standing. She lifted her chin to meet his eyes. She still couldn't get used to how tall, how intense his powerful presence was. Abandoned? What do you mean? I pass by there a couple times a month and I've never seen anyone go in or out of those apartments. You must be mistaken. Zane looked at her doubtingly but let it go as he moved away and back over to the book he'd been perusing before she distracted him. Maybe. Sera followed him back to the couch and picked up another book of her own. They sat in silence for a few minutes reading. It was more comfortable than either of them wanted to admit, except for the strain of tension that was beginning to wear. Zane wasn't sure how much longer he'd spend only imagining the feel of her beneath him. Sera's heart was tapping an unsteady rhythm, as she continued to throw coveted glances at his lips. If only he'd stop biting on them, she'd be able to stop imagining him doing the same to her own. Tell me, he finally drawled after what felt like decades. More about your family history. Sera looked up at him in surprise. To be honest, there's not much I know. How is that possible? Humans live to make excuses for their behavior. Their favorite tactic is blaming their history, their past. Sera was already shaking her head. I don't blame anyone for anything. How enlightened you are. What is it you want to hear, Zane? Don't get testy. I'm just asking a question. She sighed, giving him her full attention. My mother raised me, well, sort of. Sort of. Sera felt her face heat with embarrassment. I spent a lot of time alone as a kid. She was busy with work. And your father? I know nothing about him. Does that bother you? She shrugged his question off. Not really. And your family's interest in magic? Did you happen to learn anything new? Sera shook her head again. I'm still pretty much in the dark. My mother was vague about the whole thing. But I'm sure another trip to the library can't do any harm. Zane nodded, his forehead creased with deep thought. She was more alone than he originally assumed. He felt his heart pang as he imagined her as a child, in a vast library with only books to keep her company. What about you? Do you have a family? She questioned carefully. I did. I don't know where they are now. Will you find them once we break the curse? Zane smiled grimly. What an optimist. If, he stressed, we break the curse, then maybe. I don't know where I'd even begin to look. I'll help you, she insisted. Is that your favorite phrase? There was that sarcastic tone again. It annoyed her as much as it amused her. It's an important one. It's part of who I am, she declared without her usual energy. Zane frowned. Did she ever stop working? I'd like to think you'll take your own philosophy to heart one of these days. Her curious gaze fell on him. Meaning? When's the last time anyone helped you? She opened her mouth to respond, but realized just as she did, that she had absolutely nothing to say. Zane took this moment to push on. You're so busy making sure everyone else is okay. Do you even stop to think about yourself? That's not, I don't. She was grasping at strings. What? He prodded. Sera dropped her head back down to the book, her eyes scanning the ancient text in search of some answer to his impossible question. Sera, his soft voice sent a chill down her spine. Is there no one you can truly depend on? Is that why you have to do everything yourself? Are you trying to make up for something? She slammed the book shut suddenly, her eyes flinging to him with anger. But he could see beneath her ire a sadness, a loneliness that clamped like an iron vice around his heart. Unshed tears were swimming deep in her gaze. I have been alone for most of my life. Is that what you want to hear? I don't dwell on it. I don't let it affect me. I just keep moving forward. I have to keep moving forward or... Her voice broke as she stared into his eyes. The concern she saw there almost undid her. You'll drown in the past. I know. I have nothing to complain about, she whispered. Her voice was dragged down with resignation. You don't have to be strong all the time. His voice washed over her like a soothing wave of calm. Not with me, he added quietly. With him. Sera felt her insides melt at his look of promise. Before she could contemplate how this man, this monster, had wormed his way into her life, Zane's hand slowly reached out to cup her cheek. She let her face rest against the cool surface of his palm. What the hell is wrong with me? He asked as he unwillingly acknowledged the raging desire to keep this woman safe. Happy. Plenty of things, she whispered back. Her voice sounded 1,000 miles away as she fell deeper into his touch. Zane's only thought was to close the short distance between their parted lips, and claim the consequences that would come from his irrational actions. He felt his hand slide to the back of her neck as he leaned into her sweet, intoxicating breath. Chapter 16 Manipulations of Madness. The diner was practically empty. It took him only 3 seconds flat to realize Sera wasn't there. Lonnie felt a momentary sense of relief that was short-lived. All confidence flew from him as the young girl at the counter informed him the owner was not here either. Lonnie's heart skipped a beat as he forced the look of rage behind a violently crumbling mask of false calm. Sorry, Zane took off early tonight. Zane. Now he had a name to go with that arrogant face. Lonnie smiled tightly at the girl. He was glad he'd left the sword in his car. He could only imagine she would have called the police on him by now if that wasn't the case. She was already looking at him with a slight wariness he tried to shrug off. We were supposed to meet up. He lied through his teeth, trying his best to look disappointed. Keely frowned with confusion. Are you his friend? She asked with doubt. Lonnie hesitated. The girl was sharp. He read her features, rapidly coming to the conclusion that Zane did not have things like friends. More of a business acquaintance. Ah, she nodded with understanding as if that made a lot more sense. Yeah, he's a weird dude. You think so? Not in a bad way, she amended. He's just not like normal people. Like Sera, Lonnie thought, his chest aching with panic. Have you known him a long time? A few years. He's a fair boss. But I wish he'd get a life. He spends so much time by himself that's not good for you, you know? Social interaction is important. That it is. Though over the last few days I noticed he has been acting sort of different, she mused, speaking more to herself than to him. Different. He's been smiling. A lot. It's freaking me out. She let out a little laugh that Lonnie joined in with. Ha, yeah, that doesn't sound like him at all, he improvised. I hope it's a permanent change. He's much more enjoyable to be around without that nasty scowl he constantly wears. Lonnie knew in his heart this change had to do with Sera. She was capable of making the most miserable man forget his head completely. He felt his hands tighten into fists at his sides. He cleared his throat, his foot tapping with impatience. I need to drop something off to him, he continued calmly. Well, you can leave it here if you want, she began, but he was already shaking his head. He asked me to give it to him directly. Do you know where I can find him this time of night? I guess he'd be at home? Right, of course I'll stop by there. You've been to his apartment? She asked with a little annoyance. He's only invited me over once and I'm the closest thing that jerk has to a friend. Yeah, well, like you said, he spends most of his time alone. For sure. He's too moody to usually put up with any sort of company for an extended period of time. That's why I make sure he stays put in the kitchen. Lonnie forced himself to laugh. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. He quipped with feigned amusement. He could tell she was warming up to him a bit. He hit her with a charming smile. Where does he live again? I wrote it down, but I'm so busy these days I misplace everything. Ugh, I know exactly what you mean. Keely responded with a fierce nod of agreement. Lonnie asked his question so flippantly, she didn't think anything of it as she rattled off Zane's address. He smiled in thanks. By the way, how is the food drive going? Keely tilted her head at an angle and inspected him. The food drive? He frowned with growing confusion. Yes, when I was here the other night Zane mentioned it. Oh, that was a few weeks ago. But I'm hoping to organize another one soon. Are you interested in helping out? We could definitely use. But the rest of her words were drowned out by the roaring panic that filled Lonnie's head. He was so furious, so astounded that for a moment his eyesight began to blur. He hadn't had a rage-fueled blackout in so long. He'd spent years training his mind and body to act as one. It was the split that he could not afford to lose control over. Lonnie steadied his breath. She lied to him. All while that prick stood there with his gloating smile, probably thinking what an idiot Lonnie was to believe her. But no, Zane was responsible for this betrayal. Sera was too naive, too trusting when it came to helping those who would love nothing more than to take advantage of her compassionate nature. She didn't trust him enough to tell him the truth. So what were they really doing together if not work? The words of the shadow once again resounded like an amplified megaphone in his ears. Why are you wasting precious time? They might already be. Lonnie was going to ruin Zane for attempting to take away the one thing that made his life worth living. He realized the girl behind the counter had stopped talking and was gazing at him with concern. Hey man, are you alright? Lonnie shook his head. Sorry, his voice was trembling, spaced out for a second. I just remembered something. I have to go. Killy blinked. What had she said? He looked for a moment like he was going to burn the place down as his piercing deep eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't quite pinpoint. He turned quickly, striding towards the door as she watched on. Keely was flustered and more than relieved that he was leaving. The energy she was getting from the darkly handsome man had turned wickedly unpleasant. Let Zane deal with the mess he most likely made. And then the man was gone. She listened as the screeching sound of tires clashed against her ears. I wonder who he pissed off this time. Keely thought she should probably give Zane a heads up. But then she remembered he didn't have a phone. Lonnie took a deep breath. His heart was racing with wild wrath as he stood outside the apartment. He pressed his ear against the worn wood, just catching the end of Zane's unknown question. With me? There was a pause. Lonnie was barely aware of the sweat that had broken out on his forehead, his focus intense. Plenty of things. Lonnie's heart stopped. Her voice.
Sera.
He listened harder. The sound of silence took his mind to a place that no sane man should have to go. Silence was the confirmation of all his worst nightmares. Something inside him snapped in that moment. His hands were shaking as he pulled the sword from its sheath. No one will take you from me, he promised, his eyes so dark they appeared black. Lonnie took a step back, then another. His body moved with intent as his leg flew forward. With crushing force he extended it directly towards the center of the apartment door.
Chapter 17. Mine.
The splintering of wood sounded like a firecracker in the still night. Sera and Zane jumped apart, but the damage had already been done. Standing in the doorframe was Lonnie. His breathing was harsh, his powerful body shaking with rage, and his eyes. Sera recognized the look at once. Betrayal. She rose quickly to her feet, instinctively trying to block Zane from Lonnie's war path. This move seemed to infuriate her fiancé beyond comprehension. He took a step forward. She took one back. That was when she noticed the sharp and deadly-looking sword clutched in his trembling hand. She felt Zane slowly stand behind her, but she didn't dare take her eyes off Lonnie. How did you find me? She asked, staring at him as if she'd never seen him before. His only response was a growl, as his eyes darted past her and landed on Zane. You're gonna pay for that, right? Zane mockingly questioned, jerking his head towards the door. Lonnie took 2 more steps. Before Sera could react, Zane shoved her behind him. He strode towards Lonnie, not an ounce of fear on his features. You're the one who is going to pay dearly, Lonnie hissed as he took in the scene that had been unfolding right before he'd smashed through the door. They'd been inches from one another. He'd arrived just in time. Zane shrugged with nonchalance. Am I though? Lonnie directed his question toward Sera. What are you doing here? Zane responded instead. Shouldn't I be the one asking that question? Lonnie lowered his voice and unleashed his calm fury onto Zane. You're lucky I haven't gutted you yet, so shut your mouth and stay out of this. He turned his attention back to Sera. Sera, come here. We're leaving. Now. Sera's shock turned quickly to defiance. She didn't move. You don't get to tell me what to do. Zane smiled. Sera's a big girl. I think she can decide who she wants to be with. I said. Lonnie gritted his teeth, now only inches from Zane's face, to stay out of it, and away from her. He attempted to reach for Sera, but Zane's arm shot out, stopping him in his tracks. Did I say you could come into my home? I don't need your permission. Now move before I do something we will both regret. Stop, Sera called, her heart pumping fast as she watched the dangerously precarious conversation unfurl. Lonnie, we are just working. Lonnie's gaze hardened even more as he turned his attention back to her. Working? He let out a bark of laughter that held no humor. Just like you were working at the diner? The food drive was weeks ago. Stop lying to me. What is this? Tell me what's going on, he demanded. It's a private matter, Sera bit out. Yes, Zane drawled, a wicked smile creeping onto his lips. Private. Also personal. And completely none of your business. Everything that has to do with Sera is my business. She is my fiancée. Zane cocked his head to the side. For now. Lonnie's eyes flashed with absolute menace, but before he could make a move, Sera stepped up between them. Her back was to Zane as she glared up at Lonnie's face. Zane, could you give us a moment? I'm not leaving you alone with this lunatic. Lonnie pushed Sera to the side. Say that again, give me a reason. Oh, I'll give you more than just a reason. Can't you see you're interrupting what was a particularly enjoyable evening? Sera closed her eyes as his words reverberated with wicked connotation. You're going to regret this, Lonnie snarled. Not as much as you are. Zane quipped back. The tense moment seemed to last a lifetime for Sera. Everything slowed as she watched the disastrous situation unfolding. Before she could attempt to put a stop to what was surely a ticking time bomb, chaos exploded. 1 second Lonnie was standing quite still, and the next he was raising the sword up and bringing it down with a powerful swipe of fury.
Sera Hastings.
Zane moved rapidly. The blade of the sword slashed directly where his chest had been seconds earlier. He twisted around, lunging for the nearest weapon he could find. His chef knives, recently sharpened, they gleamed on the counter's surface. Just as he turned back, Lonnie swung the deceptively powerful weapon once more in his direction. Zane threw his arms up, crossing the steel blades in an X. The twin knives scrapped and screamed across the hard metal. They both pushed off simultaneously, backing away and circling one another. What's with the sword? Zane taunted. Are you making up for what you lack in other areas? Lonnie's rage was so palpable, Sera could taste it on her tongue. Lonnie swung again, missing Zane's shoulder by a hair's breadth. Zane was agile. He danced away, his gaze entirely focused on his opponent. Sera could help the yelp that broke from her throat. Was she going into shock? She pinched herself, not completely sure if this was actually happening. This will be the last time you ever see her, Lonnie spat. I'll make sure of it. You can't keep her from me. You don't own her. Zane's eyes darkened at the prospect of Sera disappearing from his life. He would not allow it. Lonnie lunged forward, his steps quick as he attempted to plunge his weapon into Zane's side. Zane spun away, his knives flashing. His hands acted so swiftly that the steel looked like nothing more than blurs of silver mist. He stepped forward and back, making quick work of blocking every slice Lonnie threw his way. I don't know what lies you've whispered into her ears, but Sera is too trusting for her own good. She needs me to protect her from leeches like you. Zane's face hardened as the knives once again clashed against Lonnie's sword. The pressure they were exerting was causing the metal to whine in protest. She's more capable than you give her credit for. I don't think you know her at all. Lonnie's movements were becoming more and more sloppy as his anger continued to build and climb to dangerous heights. The rage Zane was provoking in him was becoming a distraction. He hauled back, both of his arms raised, moments from ending this when Zane saw his opening. He struck so fast Lonnie didn't have time to react before the knives sliced across both sides of ribs. He stumbled back. No. Sera yelled against her will. Zane turned to look at her. His eyes blazing. His chest heaving from physical exertion. It was his first mistake. Lonnie took the opportunity to swing forward, in a long sweeping slice. The steel of his sword ripped into Zane, carving across his abdomen. The blow tore open his shirt, exposing his bloodied skin. Zane tripped backwards, arms wrapping around the wound. Sera felt her knees go weak, but instinct moved her forward. Zane only wavered for a moment. When he raised his head, Sera saw the fangs, claws and tattoos that he was no longer able to hide. She stopped in her tracks. Lonnie was staring at the sword, coated in his enemy's blood, as if he couldn't believe what he'd just done. Sera was the only one to see Zane's blood for what it really was. Black. Before she could open her mouth, Zane threw down his knives and charged at Lonnie. Their bodies collided with brute force as they went tumbling back and smashed into the bookshelf. The sword clattered from Lonnie's grip as Zane's hand came down on his wrist with a hit so fierce, it snapped the bone. Lonnie ducked as Zane swung his fist with precise intent. Any sign of Zane's mocking amusement vanished. He was the embodiment of rage. Lonnie rammed him back and threw his good arm out with a sharp jab. The blow connected. Blood instantaneously gushed from Zane's nose. He let out an inhumane roar as he slid into a low crouch and used his leg to sweep Lonnie's own from beneath him, dispatching him to the floor. Zane crashed to his knees, straddling his adversary as he drew back and let his fist fly. His knuckles crunched against the power of his punch. The force jerked Lonnie's head to the side so quickly it sounded as if his neck snapped. He turned back to reveal his mouth full of blood. He spat it on the floor, but before he could blink, Zane hit him again. And again. Punch after punch, he barreled into Lonnie's face. Lonnie's blocks were becoming less and less efficient. Zane was breaking him down. Stop. Zane didn't even hear her. I said stop, she nearly screamed. Sera rushed to Zane's side. The monster was out of control. She had to bring him back. Zane. She grabbed his face in her hands. Her touch immediately broke his frenzy as his shredded fists stopped their assault. His eyes cleared as he looked at her. Moments passed. None of them moved. Then, like a spell being broken, Zane pushed himself to his feet as Lonnie rolled to his side and rose unsteadily. Sera stumbled back. The only sound was the combination of their collective, heavy breathing. Sera was trembling, but her voice was steady when she spoke. Are you pleased with yourselves? She hissed with contempt. Do you see what you've done? Zane dropped onto the couch, wiping the blood from his face. Lonnie leaned against the wall, holding onto his ribs. Sera felt her temper spike at their silence. Are you animals? Do you realize you could have killed one another? They looked at her as if that had exactly been the plan. Sera picked up the fallen sword, examining it. An unseen, explosive rush of energy washed through her. Where had he gotten this thing? Why did it feel like it was more than just a normal weapon? Lonnie, leave now. He took a step towards her. Sera, you attacked an unarmed man after breaking into his apartment. What is wrong with you? Please leave. Before I call the police. The look he sent her was somewhere between astonishment and heartbreak. You'd send me back to prison? Zane raised his eyes at the man's question.
Sera Hastings.
Don't make me ask you again. Come with me, he begged. Is this what you think will make me want to be with you again? I wasn't in my right mind, He stopped, unable to spill the words he so desperately needed her to hear. I'm sorry, Sera. It's not me you should be apologizing to. Lonnie's eyes darkened with wrath. To him? When he's trying so desperately to take advantage of you. You're not allowed to waltz back into my life demanding anything of me. It's not your decision who I spend my time with. Like you didn't take advantage of me yourself. She spat as she stormed towards him. Her arm shot out as she offered him the sword. Go. Please. Now, she raged, slamming the blade flat against his chest before turning back towards Zane. He was looking at her with an emotion she couldn't understand. She dropped her eyes and she began packing up her books. The silence was unbearable as the two men watched her. Sera felt the angry tears threatening to slip down her cheeks, but she ignored them. Lonnie's footsteps began to retreat. She listened to the sound of his shoes crunching over the broken glass and splintered wood. Only when she knew he'd truly left, did she let out the breath she'd been holding. She looked up to see Zane's attempt at a devious grin through his bloody and battered face. He was an absolute mess. What? She snapped. You're cute when you're angry. Chapter 18 Desperate Measures. Lonnie limped across the threshold of the master bedroom. The blood had somewhat clotted on his ribs, but the shallow knife wound still caused him to grimace with discomfort. He didn't even want to consider the state his face must be in. He'd not expected that kind of rage from the other man. The sword he'd forgotten he was still holding onto fell from his weakening grip to the marble floor with a deafening clang. He winced against the sound as he tried to sort through the disastrous events that transpired this evening. Now that his adrenaline had worn off, fatigue and heartbreak quickly stole over him. Not bothering to clean himself up, especially not with a shattered wrist, he carefully unbuttoned his shirt with one hand. It was ruined with knife tears and blood. He flinched with every movement, not able to shrug it off. He gave up. Lonnie collapsed on his massive bed. Had he lost his mind? What the hell had been thinking? He answered the question for himself. He'd not. Those were the feelings that Sera inspired in him. He didn't think when she was involved. Love was irrational, and this one was slowly driving him insane. When it came to Sera and her safety, all bets were off. But still, he could find no excuse for his completely aberrant behavior. He'd been out of his mind with rage and jealousy, and that psychopath had provoked him, brought out his worst side. Now it was probable that his emotional, impulsive actions had cost him more than he was willing to accept. Sera had been so furious and it was his fault. He'd driven her even farther away from him. Lonnie turned onto his side, fiery pain shooting through his ribs. His head pounding with the dark bruises he was sure covered his eyes. He hoped Zane was suffering as greatly as he was. What the hell am I going to do now? And as if he'd summoned the shadow with his internal question, it appeared in the corner of his darkened room. The energy was different than before. Lonnie could feel malevolence and fury pouring out of the dark smoke. You've returned without her. It wasn't a question. Lonnie didn't bother to respond. You do realize that if you fail, your sacrifice will all be for naught? I'll handle it, he bit out, cringing as every word sent a sharp slicing ache through his tender jaw. The shadow laughed with disbelief. Handle it? I'm not giving up. The shadow snapped with irritation. How could you allow another to covet the woman who is rightfully yours? She's not mine, he muttered. I was delusional to think that she'd want me after everything I've put her through. What is this? Resignation. People change, he heard himself whisper. Do you really think so? The shadow considered his statement. Perhaps they hide, cover up their true feelings, but deep down, we both know that change only happens in the rarest of circumstances. Don't act like you know anything about me, he shot back with defiance. The shadow let out a low sarcastic huff. How arrogant you are, even as you lay there battered and bleeding. I'll help you. Don't touch me, he spat with a glare. The shadow did not move, but Lonnie could feel the wisps of black smoke sift over him, mending his broken body. He reached his hand up to test his wrist. He felt his mouth, his face. All of the soreness and swelling was gone. He was healed. Lonnie sat up slowly, once again turning his attention to the visitor. The sword. Lonnie jerked his head towards the floor. The sword lay there, still coated with Zane's blood. Slowly it became encased in shadows before it moved on its own, floating eerily until it was once again absorbed back into the mass of darkness. The shadow was silent for several heartbeats. Now I understand, the voice continued on with a note of wonder in its tone. You have been bested by someone with far greater strength than your own. But this is not the end. Lonnie felt his jaw clench at the reminder of his failed fight. It's never the end with you. Get out. I need rest. Interesting, the shadow hissed, ignoring his command. I believe you've stumbled upon something quite unusual. Lonnie didn't bother to respond. He didn't care what was interesting or unusual. All he wanted was Sera beside him, wrapped in his arms, her head resting on his chest. His longing was so strong it sent stabs of agonizing torment through his chest. He'd take physical wounds over this pain any day. He closed his eyes, willing himself to not break down, to not give in to the seething despair that would surely consume him. You don't have to make yourself sick, the voice promised with false compassion. He felt a cool, invisible hand run across his forehead. This doesn't mean that you give up. Don't you trust me? Lonnie snorted with dark irony. The shadow went on, rest now. You'll see, everything will resolve itself. Leave it in my capable hands. Lonnie hated the sound of those words. His eyes once again fell to the shadow. What are you going to do? There was a pause as the shadow contemplated the endless possibilities. First, I am going to take care of the one who is causing you such heartache. Lonnie shivered at the deceptively calm but evil tone. Then, I will return your fiancée to you. She doesn't want me. He could help the morose and agonizing voice with which he truthfully spoke those words. Once this inconvenience is out of the way, she will see reason. She will return to you, the shadow assured him with confidence. Lonnie raised an eyebrow with skepticism. How can you be so sure? Do you doubt my abilities? Lonnie shook his head. If one thing was true, he knew the shadow would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. Good. Don't worry. Help is on the way. Lonnie nodded, half listening as a sudden wave of exhaustion crashed over him. He fell back slowly as his eyes shut, blocking out the cruelty of this world. He was asleep before his head hit the pillow. The shadow smiled through the black smoke with increasing wrath and lifted the sword up to inspect the blood that had dried there. The blade told everything that needed to be known. Yes, this was definitely not human, not even close. It explained the reason behind Lonnie's decimation. But his fiancée. How had she come across such a creature? What did he want with her? How dare he? The shadow filled with insuppressible fury. There were preparations to be made. The work would begin tonight. A monster who eluded capture was unacceptable. As good as dead in this new world. There's only one way to fight a monster, Lonnie, the voice explained calmly to the unconscious man. With other, much more terrible monsters.